Welcome to the Aston Martin stand, the Aston Martin Lagonda stand. And what I want to kick off with today is the Aston Martin Vantage, the brand new Aston Martin Vantage, which was launched about 3 months ago. To great acclaim, I have to say. I think it's an absolutely stunning car. It's the next generation of the relationship with Mercedes, and as a consequence of that, we've got the AMG 503 brake horsepower engine in the front of these cars, with all the Mercedes electronic and transmission systems that go with it. So this car should be massively reliable. But what Aston have actually done is they've taken the basic components and they've turned them into Aston engines. So they produce the sound and the power that Aston want to get for their engine. And of course, this is a massive leap forward from the old Vantage. I think the old Vantage in top power was producing about 430 brake horsepower, where this one is, as I said, 503. I love the way that the lights come round the top of the rear hatch. It's effectively a two-door hatch in effect, but the boot starts from here, so you do have a bit of a lip, but the inside is quite large, which I'll show you. That didn't work, so maybe you have to have the ignition on. Sorry about that, guys. There is quite a lot of room in the back. Very aggressive rear diffuser, which I really like, and I like the metal panels here as well. These are metal with the hexagon shapes. Exhaust both sides. Huge side skirts, which I assume you can have in carbon. 20-inch wheels. Just set the car off. Now, one of the things with this car you can't have is actually the traditional styling cues from other Astons, like the Vanquish and the DB9, DB11, where you have the strakes going along the side. What Aston have decided to do with the Vantage is to provide a panel here that effectively is releasing air from the wheel arch, as in the curler cue with the DB11. But these panels here are configurable, so you can have it in carbon fibre or in any colour that you want. And then one of the things that I really like about this car is the inside. Inside, this is next generation Aston. Now, the DB11 is one of the most beautiful shapes to my eyes on the road today. But the problem with it for me was the inside, although not unattractive, just wasn't special enough to justify £160,000 to £180,000 price tag. Quite cosy, which I hope to be able to demonstrate. Quite cosy, but still really purposeful and really nice. I mean, I'm really impressed with that. If I can bring you back here, Chris, we'll go to the front in a second, but look how wide those rear arches are. I mean, that is just lovely. It gives the car from the rear such a planted stance. A planted stance. I mean, there's no question of that. Again, from a styling viewpoint, it's next generation Aston. So they've kept the slight curves that you expect to see of an Aston grille, but nevertheless they've made it larger and they've made it more aggressive. I think the front of this car is stunning, and I was always wondering how Aston moved on from their existing front, and now I know. That is utterly beautiful to my mind. I'd be really interested to see what you think, guys. Really has given me an opportunity to have a good look, and we'll try and get inside, but at the moment it's a bit mad. Are you waiting?
No.
Okay. Can I let Chris go in this? No, you go. No, okay. So if you come in, what I want to do is just show you the instrumentation from the front. Lovely steering wheel, huge great paddles. Obviously it's a twin clutch automatic Mercedes gearbox. And then we've got this central part here which has the engine start and stop in the middle. It's neutral and drive rather than manual and drive, as I said earlier, and reverse and park. Clothing carbon fibre, that's an option. And then you can see the MMI interface control unit is the same as you get in the AMG GT. One of the things about Astons that slightly limit the convenience inside the car is there's no glove box. There's a lot of room back there, it's really good. Such a good looking car. I suspect that the car comes as standard with electrically adjusted heated memory seats. Really impressed with that. Really, really, really nice. Next generation, guys. And the doors, as you can see, the doors open upwards in the traditional Aston way, which I think is a nice touch. Right, guys, slightly more traditional for Aston, we have the new DB9 convertible. And to my mind, the beautiful lines of the coupe have not been lost in any way. So if you come over here, Chris, and get the lines down the side there with the huge rear arches, just beautiful. I love that on the Aston. And I have a slight preference for the side strakes. Now obviously, as you know, this is what they call the curlicue, so this releases air from inside the wheel arch, which apparently stops lift at high speed. This is obviously a pearlescent white. Strange colour of interior, probably wouldn't be my choice, but nevertheless, I think what they're doing on the stand is making a statement, and it certainly does that. Hopefully, the DB11 will at some point receive an update from the Vantage to make it just a little bit more interesting inside. That would be my view. Nothing wrong with it, just not quite exciting enough, although you never forget you're in an expensive car, I think, with that colour of leather. Otherwise, very similar. Now, the DB11 convertible is only available in V8 form, whereas obviously the coupe is available in both V12 and V8. But I haven't driven the V8, but my understanding that the V8 is a slightly lighter, slightly more sports-focused car than the V12. So I'm hoping that that's carried forward onto the convertible. But I do like that, isn't that? It's so beautifully finished. It's got an 8-layer canvas roof, which apparently you cannot hear from the inside the outside noise.
Okay.
From the V12 that we had on test about 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, you can see we've got the vented areas here, but the V12 had another one in the centre, and we had a side strake in the centre of the grille here also, which just gave it a little more interest. Obviously, I noticed that on the coupe V8 it also had the two, but that's how they differentiated. Standard Aston Martin grille, which, whilst maybe not as aggressive as the Vantage, is still very beautiful. We're going to move over to the Valkyrie. Now this Valkyrie here is actually for the racetrack, okay, in much the same way as we talked about the Senna GTR earlier. This is Adrian Newey, who was apparently responsible for taking the Valkyrie and making it applicable to the racetrack. This is Adrian Newey let loose. He's been allowed to do anything he wanted to produce a car that is about 1,000 kilos, so a ton. It's about a ton. This one has 1,140 horsepower. So it's more than 1 to 1. You know, always the ideal, if you can, is to have 1 ton weight, 1,000 brake horsepower. This, about the right levels in weight, but more horsepower. But you can see if you get the camera right down low, this is not really a car for the road. They're making 25 of these. I cannot remember how many of the ones they're making for the road were, but I don't think it was more than 75. Yeah, and then look here, Chris. Look at this. With the exposed suspension on the... that's just... lovely. Isn't it? It is lovely. I think that's lovely. Clearly this one's not rigged out to put anybody in. And again, very much like the GTR, very much like the GTR, we have an unbelievably low front spoiler. Apparently in production versions you will be able to see out under the sort of the top cover over the canopy, which is difficult to believe, isn't it? It does look mean. If you were to have the road going version of this and this came up behind you, I think you get out of the way. What a phenomenal machine. And then through the bottom here you can see that the tub is really not that big for two people. And I noticed that when I was at the Frankfurt show, I think it was the Frankfurt show, I noticed that the tub was literally just enough for two people with their legs coming in towards the centre, so they can get the airflow through the car. And as you know, the Adrian Newey, of course Adrian Newey being the technical director of Red Bull, and now they have a tie-up with Aston, have for some time had a tie-up with Aston Martin. Aston Martin sponsor the Formula One racing car, which I assume is last year's model rather than this year's model. A quick peek. So this is the latest Formula One racing car announced by Red Bull a couple of months ago. Do you know, they've gone back to the aggressive style. They went through a period of the tyres at the rear being quite small, the ones at the front being relatively small. But look, we've really gone back to the way that Formula One used to be. Still probably running a 1.5 turbocharged V6 though. Probably producing 900 HP if not more. And these things generally weigh about 670 kilos. They're fairly, despite the size of them, because you know, if you look at the ground print, the footprint of this compared to the Aston Martin, which is not a small car, it's quite big. Okay, one of Aston Martin's next target market is really to expand the Lagonda name, and this is obviously a prototype and probably will never see the light of day exactly as is, but I think it does give a good general indication of the shape from Aston to come. Now you can see clearly there's no transmission tunnel in, so therefore this car is all electric. So whether or not the first Lagonda car ends up being a version of this with with a hybrid or fully probably fully electric, but with a modified interior, I honestly don't know. I do think it's a very futuristic looking machine, but you can see quite clearly why and how people can get much more space in an electric car like the I-Pace Jaguar to allow much more room for a smaller footprint. But having said that, Chris, this is quite a big car. I think Aston Martin, like Jaguar, have identified the fact that they're going to need to produce emission-free machines, especially if they're to be usable in town. Now this is interesting. I know they're not legal right now, but obviously the wing mirrors on this car are cameras, and presumably they're actually bringing that information into the car so the driver can set it up on screens in front of them I believe that that will become legal, so you won't actually need to have a huge wing mirror. One of the problems with wing mirrors, of course, is that from a coefficient viewpoint, they're not that helpful to the aerodynamics of the car. There's a lot of room in there. And of course, all these cars, this one apparently is set up for mode 5 automation, so basically it's able to drive itself. And I think that is where a lot of these cars will come into their own, is when they drive the owner without the owner having to necessarily get overly involved. Before we leave the Aston stand, I just want to chat very briefly about how quickly Aston Martin have managed to get out their GT3 racer. Huge rear arches, huge diffuser system. Again, this is not a road car in any way, or attempting to be. Totally stripped out inside. Perspex glass, very light plastic glass. All set up for racing with a huge front diffuser. I think, you know, Aston are doing things properly now. You know, I think they really are getting their act together. I'm so impressed with them. I was hoping to see the new Vanquish on the stand, but unfortunately that's not available, but still pretty impressive.